बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। आप लोग सब मेरी आवाज़ सुन सकते हैं होपफुली?
जी हाँ।
हाँ, थैंक यू। ओके, सो अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन। I welcome you all to ERC webinar on a very important subject of monetary policy of Pakistan, challenges and pitfalls. Today we have with us eminent guest speakers and experts on the subject. First, let me confess that monetary economics and policy is not my forte. But since the monetary policy of the country impacts the economy profoundly, I think it is in the interest of all of us, especially our students, to learn from our experts and guest speakers. I have the privilege of introducing very eminent speakers who are present here, starting from Dr. Riazuddin Saab. Riazuddin Saab is here with us. And I welcome you, sir. Riaz Saab is not unknown to AERC. He's an alumni of the AERC. He has worked here and then moved to SBP and raised to the position of Deputy Governor of the SBP and made AERC proud of him. The second guest speaker is Dr. Mahmoodul Hassan Sahab. He is the Director of Monetary Policy Department of the State Bank of Pakistan. Thank you, Dr. Sahab, for taking out some of your precious time to the out of your busy schedule. Dr. Atiqur Rahman, he is an associate professor at the Kashmir Institute of Economics, University of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Atiqur Rahman is also not unknown to AERC. He visited AERC to conduct a workshop on econometrics and became extremely popular among our students and other participants. Everybody seems to be following him in econometrics. Last but not the least is Dr. Aqdas Afzal, Program Director and the Assistant Professor, Social Development and Policy, Habib University. He is also not new for the AERC, as we remember his very thought-provoking and informative seminar at the AERC. So I like to thank you all very eminent participants and guest speakers here once again. Let me start off by saying few words about the monetary policy, that it involves central banks' use of instruments to influence interest rates or money supply in the economy with the objective to keep overall prices and financial markets stable. A monetary policy is essentially a stabilization or demand management policy that cannot impact long-term growth potential of an economy. The preamble of the SBP Act 1956, as it envisages monetary policy to secure monetary stability and attain fuller utilization of the economy's productive resources. So in SBP's view, the best way to achieve these objectives on a sustainable basis is to keep inflation low and stable. So in practice, I think the State Bank of Pakistan's monetary policy, it strives to strike a balance among multiple and often competing considerations. These include the controlling inflation, ensuring payment system and financial stability, preserving foreign exchange reserves, and supporting private investments. With these few words, I like to invite Riaz Saab. They are waiting for your very academic kind of presentation, and your, I think it's a half kind of a lecture for our students, but hopefully very informative, and they must have listened to you very carefully. Next guest speaker is Mahmood Khan Saab. So, sir, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Walaikum
Thank you
salam.
very much, madam, for your nice introduction and providing us the opportunity to explain some of the concepts. I think Riazuddin Saab has already covered a lot of theoretical issues. I would focus more on practical points. So for that, I will share a few slides. So I hope everyone can see this. Hello?
Gigi, we can see this slide. Key points, yeah.
So basically, I was trying to focus on 4 points. the first point, which has been highlighted by you as well as Riaz Saab as well. So I would be a little brief on that. And then I will spend 2-3 minutes on monetary policy in Pakistan and what happened in COVID. And the focus would be more on challenges, what as a central bank we face. So as of our preamble of SBP Act, nothing new to add. It's a dual mandate. We all know to secure monetary stability and fuller utilization of country's productive resources. While State Bank basically focus on price stability, and why it is so? Because the price stability has certain advantages. I have listed down just few of them. The first and the far most important one is reducing uncertainty. So if we have high inflation, the prices are moving up or down, then of course that uncertainty is not conducive for economic activity. It affects our decisions through various channels. For instance, for the businesses, if we have high and volatile inflation, that will increase risk premium. And of course, price stability would help reduce that. Similar is the case with the frequent revision in contract negotiations. That's also took place because businesses have to do that. And if we have stable prices, or you can say low and stable inflation, that would help in that. On above all, the price mechanism itself is very important, because if we don't have good idea of price discovery in the economy, right, it means we will not be able to make informed decisions. And the prices takes into account good amount of information in it. So that's also important, and only stable and you can say low inflation can help promoting this sort of mechanism as compared to price instability. Of course, the value of money is very important. We generally talk about exchange rate. That's our, you can say, very favorite topic. And why the value of exchange rate moving so much, inflation play an important role. Another important, which I think State Bank does not explicitly focus on that's the distribution of wealth. The inflation, I think low and stable inflation is one way where the central bank can contribute to, you can say, the improvement in the distribution of wealth by maintaining low and stable inflation. Then the question also arises, that's a one way to deal with it. Another is basically what monetary policy can do and what monetary policy cannot do. I believe this has already been covered in your introductory remarks, and Riaz Saab has also talked about that. So let's not go there. Here is one interesting point, because this chart is simply real GDP growth rate from the last 30 years. We can interpret this chart from many ways, and we can make many points from this. But here, the point which I would like to make is that the target is always, you can say, higher, with the exception of 5 years as compared to our actual real GDP growth. Now, let's think of monetary policy formulation from this point of view. For instance, if we are in 2012, we have a real GDP growth which is lower than the target. Then we have a target for next year, for FY13, which is slightly higher than what we have achieved and what was in the previous year. So what sort of monetary policy this would suggest? It would suggest some support from the monetary side. So you can take this example for all the points. The key issue is that all the time, with the exception of the 5 years, this chart would suggest that monetary policy should remain accommodative. because it's a forward looking, so each time you have a higher target to achieve, so you have to maintain an accommodative monetary policy for almost 25 years from the last 30. That's the demand. Because of dual objective, one is there. But here is another thing. That's basically inflation as compared to the target. And if we look at that, there are almost 11 years in which the inflation was lower than the target, but mostly it's been higher than the target. So if we look at from inflation point of view, again, what sort of monetary policy one has to follow? This demands some sort of contractionary monetary policy, because otherwise inflation will not come down. I'm not going about the time lag and other issues, technical issues. It's a very simple point. So one indicator which is very important for you is suggesting for monetary easing. At the same time, another important indicator, which is your prime responsibility, because that's what you can do, that's just a monetary contraction. So those are the basically trade-offs which central banks generally face. And I think in this case, the State Bank is not exception, because all the central banks have to deal with this. So practically, this is the essence, or you can say the real challenge which central bank faced from monetary policy point of view. So moving toward basically monetary policy making in Pakistan. So here I think this graph shows interest rate, policy rate, and money market rate from 2004 onward. Because it's a long graph, the point which I want to make here is that monetary policy framework has evolved with the passage of time. If I can go back to 1990s, before 90s, State Bank was conducting monetary policy through directed credit schemes. And it was basically financial sector reforms which paved the way for moving from directed credit schemes, or you can say direct monetary policy, to a market-based monetary policy mechanism. And over the last 30 years, it has come a long way. And during this process, State Bank has also moved from traditional monetary aggregate targeting to short-term interest rate targeting. And that took place in 2009. And here, if you look at the volatility which we witnessed when we were doing monetary aggregate targeting, so we have seen a lot more volatility in interest rate. So the quantity was basically controlled, so interest rate was basically allowed to fluctuate a lot. But with the passage of time, State Bank has moved toward an interest rate corridor framework. And that framework has also evolved with the passage of time, because earlier we have 300 basis point width that has been reduced. Then to anchor the inflation, you can say market expectations, where State Bank want to see the rates. Then the policy rate was introduced in 2015, and that has also been made symmetric in last year. So this is a gradual process in which you can say the framework continue to improve. And at present, State Bank generally focus on short-term interest rate and let the market liquidity adjust according to that level of interest rate. And this is done through open market operations. So that's which are visible from blue bars behind the chart. As so far decision making is concerned, that has also come a long way. Because at this point in time, we have an independent monetary policy committee, which is has a statutory role. And that consists of the Governor State Bank as a chairman and 9 members. Among those 9 members, 3 are the board of directors nominated by the board, 3 senior executives of the SBP, and then we have 3 independent renowned economists. They are also part of the MPC. So all those, you can say this MPC is responsible for the formulation of the monetary policy. And they also took decisions about the monetary policy stance, which are communicated through our, excuse me, I have to take a call for a minute because that's something.
Okay, it's all right.
Hello.
जी, जी,
Hello.
बोलिए साहब. Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry for disturbance
It's
because
all right.
sometimes you have a call which you cannot decline.
Yeah.
So I was talking about the monetary policy decision making, which is done by MPC, and they are fully empowered to take decisions on the interest rate and other monetary policy related, uh, you can say, views. This we can move toward the COVID situation because that has drastically changed, and there was a lot of discussions in the print media as well as in TV talk shows what is happening and how things are moving. And let me share what central bank has done. If you look at before the COVID-19, we were following a stabilization policy. And why that was followed? Because of the twin deficit, which we have seen deteriorating to unsustainable level. Uh, that was the situation when the COVID hit. Uh, at that point in time, I think the Monetary Policy Committee was quite quick to take decisions. 5 Monetary Policy Committee meetings held from 17th March to 25th June, so almost 3.5 months. And the policy rate, as you can see, was reduced from 13.25% to 7%. At this point in time, it is lower than what the inflation is. And if we compare it from the point of view of other countries, I think this was one of the biggest rate cut as compared to the developing country, with the exception of Argentina, because they were following their own crisis. So their point was different. Uh, one can say that because policy rate was so high, so you have to cut more. But we also looked at the countries who are having double-digit policy rate at that point in time, and even higher than that. Even Pakistan stands out in that as well. So monetary policy was not basically behind the curve to take decisions as the situation was unfolding. Beside that interest rate cut, uh, that decision was also supported by, you can say, a number of refinancing scheme, which is akin to the quantitative easing as done by other, you can say, advanced countries or some of the emerging economies. And here, if we look at, I think all the schemes, or you can say policy measures, have provided liquidity support of around 2.2 trillion, which is around 5.2% of GDP. So it's a huge stimulus, which is basically provided by the SBP to the economy. And here I would specifically like to highlight a point related to this blue bar, which is around 550 billion. So this is basically tough temporary schemes for long-term investment. The 550 billion approvals have been done, and this is for long-term investment. So because these schemes provide funding up to 10 years and at a very subsidized rate. So you can imagine that these schemes have been pretty much successful, not only in providing liquidity for their businesses, but also to facilitate long-term investment. And most of that investment will take place in the coming year, for example, the next fiscal year. Uh, as you know that all these schemes were time bound, So some of the schemes have also gradually expired. So the stimulus which is provided by the SPPs, you can say, would recede as the situation becomes normal. And here again, if we look at cross-country comparison, of course, the developing countries don't have the monetary policy or fiscal policy space which the developed countries, or you can say emerging economies, was enjoying. So that's why our overall sport is on lower side, but rather I would say it's around within the middle of the pack. So some countries have provided more and some countries have provided less because this data comes from ADB. So it's a bit old. Otherwise, the latest number as so far our own scheme is concerned, I have just shared with that. Now coming to the challenges, what sort of challenges we face? I would basically define all, you can say categorize all the challenges into three major categories. The first one is the continuous, which we deal all the time. And other is the normalization of policies. The, you can say stimulus, which has been provided. Ultimately, we have to normalize things. And the third point is beyond pandemic. So let's focus on first one, which is the major challenge, because decisions have to be made. Because each time there is a monetary policy committee, they have to make a decision. But if we look at the circumstances, the decisions are made under massive uncertainty because we have limited information about economic outlook. There is always debate about the mechanisms, or you can say relationships in the economy. These things are hotly debated by the researchers. So we all know about that. I think this challenge is aptly summed by this Deputy Governor, Bank of Japan. What he talked about that is a central bank is like a driver on a winding road with a misted up windshield and rear view mirrors and an inaccurate speedometers. What does that mean? The few red words which I have highlighted. Winding road means risk to economic activity, which are changing all the time. And sometimes we don't have very good information where this country is around the business cycle. How much output gap is running, whether it's 2%, 2.5%, 3%. Right? So all sorts of, you can say, uncertainty is there. When we talk about misted up wind screen, it means uncertainty about economic outlook. When we look into the future, that's again a lot of uncertainty there. And misted up rear window and inaccurate speedometers mean limitations of economic statistics. I would explain more on basically these points. For instance, in case of Pakistan, we all know, being researchers, that data becomes available with a significant lag. Let's take the example of GDP growth or real GDP. The national income accounts data show up once in a year. So during the whole year, we have very limited information on overall economy. It is the large scale manufacturing on which information we have. Similarly, there are some other frequency indicator like petroleum sales, cement sales, on which we can have some information. Otherwise, the national income accounts information is only available once in a year. Second point, the data, whatever we have, it contains a lot of noise. Sometimes it is because of seasonality, sometimes other issues are there. So whatever data we have, it's very hard to basically figure out what is happening underlying economic activity. Then, of course, substantial revisions to the real GDP growth. I will share a graph which will basically explain what I mean. So these sort of data limitations are faced while we are doing research. We don't have to basically care much about these because data is already available with us. But from policy making point of view, these are very serious issues. And this situation is, I think, more aggravated by COVID-19. In addition to data, then whatever the models we have, there are considerable uncertainty as well. So that's basically model uncertainty, which we also have to deal with. Here is again a very simple chart which shows the target real GDP growth, and then the first number which show up, and then the actual number which we receive after 3 years. So I would specifically highlight FY19. The target was 6.2. By end of the year, we came to know that economic activity is 3.3. And after 1 year more, we came to know it wasn't 3.3, it is basically 1.9. So if the revision is like this, what we have in 2017, 5.3, 5.2, it's okay. And if we have revisions like this, 3.3 to 1.9, which is a huge revision in economic activity, and you can imagine if any central bank is making a decision and taking into account the output gap situation of the country, how it would basically impact that decision. To be specific, let's assume our potential GDP growth is 5%, and the real GDP growth, what we have is 3.3%, right? So the output gap is 1.7%. But when we came to know, it wasn't 3.3, it is basically 1.9. So you can imagine how much uncertainty is there. Let's not talk about 20, which is yet to be basically formed up. We know last year number was negative. How negative it was, we came to know in May 2021. Then the second challenge, which was brought by COVID, and that's basically normalization of policies, because whether it's a government or you can say monetary authorities, everyone has provided stimulus. The big challenge would be how to basically normalize those policies. So here, if we look at the first stage, when the country was going through the lockdown period, at that time, whether it was the government or the central bank, the focus was on the provision of liquidity at lower cost. Because of the lockdown, the businesses don't have liquidity. So you have to basically provide liquidity. At the same time, some regulatory forbearance was also provided. Because otherwise, if a loan is not repaid, or you can say serviced for 90 days, then there are certain implications. Then the situation of second stage, which is the post-lockdown without vaccination, we all know. Here, the policy focus was to facilitate businesses by allowing relaxations on, you can say, export, import, and other business activities. And some, you can say, policy issues to deal with expected solvency issues, because definitely certain businesses will go underwater, so that will have implications for the financial stability. And at the third stage, at which we are right now, so economic recovery is also taking place and some sort of vaccination is also going on. If we look at international level, what the situation is, that's basically divergent economic recoveries. Advanced countries are expected to recover much sharply as compared to the emerging economies, because they have the resources, they can go for vaccination. As so far emerging economies are concerned, they have to basically deal with this issue for a longer period. The latest World Economic Outlook, which is released yesterday by the IMF, if you look at, that would also let you know that how much divergence in recovery is on cards. Then, of course, global financial conditions, if they change, that will have implications for our domestic financial condition as well. The fourth stage, basically, policy coordination. Regardless of the situation, everyone knows that countries would come up from this COVID with high level of debt. And this would be more problematic for countries like Pakistan, which have already limited space before the COVID-19 and relatively higher level of debt. So how to deal with this situation, that would remain a major challenge in the near term, particularly for the normalization of policies. Then I would like to end up with, you can say, a few medium-term challenges. That's again related to international developments, which will basically impact us. The first and the foremost is the potential return of inflationary pressures at international levels. No one is expecting these pressures will emerge for this year or maybe for next year, but in the medium to long run, these pressures are likely to build up. Why? Because of three major, you can say, argument or developments. One is, of course, the powerful deflationary impact of China's integration with the world is likely to recede. So once that would recede, the prices would start normalizing. Second is the trade tensions, which are still manageable, but if they intensify, then they would have inflationary consequences. And the third one is basically growing public debt, which has also, you can say, inflationary concerns. And the second key point, which would basically impact policy making, that's the financial innovations and digital currencies, particularly from a monetary policy point of view. And new financial instruments are coming in, technologies are coming in, institutions, lot of institutions are involved in dealing with those issues. So it is possible that these activities will impact monetary policy making. Here you can take the example of virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies, or you can say central bank digital currencies. If you can say movement particularly goes toward the central bank digital currencies, then there would be some changes how the commercial banks would cope with that. But if the developments basically move towards Bitcoin or Libra, those are more, you can say, think of dollarization for a developing country. So in both cases, there would be implications for the monetary policy, and central banks are not yet clear how things would move. The strategy, I think, which everyone is following and State Bank is also following, let's be open mind and not open door for every type of, you can say, technology. The best way to deal with those would be continue to monitor the developments and see some positive impact as well. For instance, these technology would allow central banks the real-time monitoring of the economy as well. So this will solve some of the problem which I was earlier highlighting. So how things would pan out, I think it's yet to be clear. So this is all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mahmood Khan. It's really a very informative presentation that you have made here for the benefit of not only for us, the faculty, as well as the students and all the participants in this webinar. Sir, you have talked about the challenges, uncertainty, and the challenges to the monetary policy. So as I understand, according to the monetary policy statement, the SBP expects average inflation to fall within the 7 to 9% range during the fiscal year 2021. So food inflation is something which is more a governance issue and may raise the CPI inflation, pushing the state bank policy to increase the policy rate prematurely. So as we all know that inflation is actually gaining steam and is likely to remain high in the next 6 months. So as per an analysis that I was going through, this is because due to the hike in the taxes and the electricity tariff, and amid the resumption of the International Monetary Fund program, and also rising international oil and commodity prices. Probably this will compel the central bank to increase the interest rate again. I mean, this is just a thought. And I think we'll take the questions from the audience later. After two experts' point of view from the State Bank of Pakistan, we have two academics here, very eminent one. So Dr. Atiqur Rahman is the next speaker, and hopefully he's here.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. I'm here. Yes.
जी जी
Okay,
जी डॉक्टर साहब हाँ बिल्कुल
uh, Let me start with some slides. Let me share with you.
जी जी जरूर.
Uh, is it visible to you, please?
Not yet. Lately, Dr. Atikur Rahman has been very active on the social media, debating about the autonomy of the State Bank of Pakistan, uh, making arguments, counter
Okay.
arguments.
Is it visible to you now?
Uh, no, sir,
Uh,
not yet again. Not
Here,
to me, at
please.
least. Yes, now we can see it. Yes.
Okay. I'm starting from this point. Look, in April 2018, the PML government was preparing her budget, and at that time, the total domestic debt was 16,200 billion, and they allocated 1,391 billion for the markup payments on this debt. Right? In 2019, PTI government was going to prepare his budget, and at that time the debt was up by 14%. Right? But the government has to allocate 82% more for the markup payments. The rise in debt is only 14%, but the rise in markup payment is 82%. Okay, so why did this happen? Everybody knows this is because the SBP people increased the policy rate, and the cost has to be bear by government. Right now, what is the reason for making this adjustment in the policy rate? If you look at the monetary policy statement, if they are right in their statements, the only reason stated for the rise in policy rate is inflation. What is the cost of this price, this adjustment? The cost, if you keep the policy rate same at the level of 2018, you would have you would have to pay 1 trillion less than what you allocated in the next year. So the cost of this policy rate adjustment is 1 trillion. And what was the purpose? The purpose was to reduce inflation. Now the question is, was there a reduction in inflation? Did you notice any reduction? Okay. It's very simple. The cost of monetary policy is in trillions. You know, we are not only country to borrow. The world is also borrowing. The United States is also borrowing. Japan is also borrowing. Right?
Oh, I think there is some technical issue again. Dr. Saab, we can't hear you. Do you remember? Maybe they. Dr. Atikur Rahman, can you hear me? Oh, there is some problem.
Hello?
जी हाँ ये बीच में कोई प्रॉब्लम हुई थी डॉक्टर साहब सो
Acha.
वी हैव मिस्ड
Okay.
1 or 2 minutes of your talk. मेरे ख्याल है आप इसी
ये
स्लाइड से शुरू कर दें जी, सिंपल
इसी
इम्प्लीकेशन।
स्लाइड it's
जी
visible to you.
या
Okay, so I was saying that we are not the only nation to borrow. There are many nations which have borrowed from their banks, and some nations have very high percentage of debt compared to us. But what is the cost? In United States, you have to pay only 0.25%. But in Pakistan, this time we have the policy rate 7%, but actually the borrowing is happening at 11%. On the long-term debt, the SPP is offering 11% coupon rate. So one need to analyze what is the need of paying so much money to the banks when the debt is available in the market at a much cheaper rate. Okay, the question is this is basically the markup payment which is causing total fiscal distress is the result of policy rate that is decided by State Bank of Pakistan. There could be some benefits, but the question is there any evaluation of the effectiveness of policy rate? Are you with me? Are you listening, please?
जी डॉक्टर
जी
साहब,
आवाज आ रही
या
है।
वी कैन लिसन टू यू। यस
Okay, the question is this is very costly project. The cost of this project is in trillions. Is there any evaluation? My respected Dr. Mahmood Al Hassan is here, and he can just inform us if there is any. But what I found actually a few days ago, I was in a talk and I asked the same question: is there any evaluation of the policy rate effectiveness of the policy rate management in Pakistan? The person from SBP replied me with these links: a pragmatic model for monetary policy analysis, and then there is evaluating performance of inflation forecasting models of Pakistan, and say this kind of things. These are the kind of papers that we write in academics for getting 1 or 2 impact factor. Is it something like the evaluation of a trillion rupee project? If you have any, you can share it with me. There's just no problem. Okay, so what is there in this State Bank of Pakistan, which is actually the evaluation of monetary policy? This is a paper from the SBP Research Bulletin. You can see the volume number and so and so. This paper is written by someone who is working in IMF, and what he write. For example, I show that there is no overwhelming empirical evidence that short-term interest rates are inversely related to inflation. What is the logic of inflation targeting? The logic of inflation targeting is the inverse relationship between interest rate and inflation, right? If you increase the interest rate, the inflation will go down. But this paper, which is available on the website of State Bank of Pakistan, this is saying that we are not finding any evidence, there is no overwhelming empirical evidence that the short-term interest rates are inversely related to inflation. If this means that by increasing interest rate, you cannot decrease inflation. If you cannot decrease, then what will happen? Then there will be two consequences. On one hand, you will have higher debt, higher markup payments, and on the other hand, you will create the difficulty for businesses. So this is what is happening with the country at present. This is another paper by Safia Shabir, who was Deputy Director at State Bank of Pakistan. And what she is saying, she found the balance sheet channel. The logic of inflation targeting depends on demand channel. But she found that for Pakistan, what is more prominent channel is the balance sheet channel. And Dr. Mahmood Al Hassan is well informed that by balance sheet channel, you mean that by increasing interest rate, you only create the difficulties for businesses. This is not implying that by increasing interest rate, you can decrease inflation. Okay, this is the actual story, what happened in Pakistan. This is from 2010 up to most recent. Look, whenever the interest rate is decreased, the inflation is also decreasing. And whenever the interest rate is increased, the inflation is going up. What does this mean? This means that there is positive relationship and there are logics. Actually, the evidences for positive relationship between the interest rate and inflation are as old as the monetary economic itself. In 1923, Gibson found the evidence, and then there are many more evidences. But what is happening? This is kind of there is some kind of bias, I guess, because whenever you found an evidence in favor of positive relationship between discount rate and inflation, the people refer it to like puzzle, paradox, and this kind of things. Whereas this is actually not a paradox, not a puzzle. Chomsky was the pioneer of monetary economics, and he was in 1850. Right? Thomas Tuchel predicted that the relationship between interest rate and inflation would be positive, and he stated very simple reason. This is basically part of cost of production. The firms borrow from the banks and they have to pay the markup. If the interest rate is going up, the cost of production for the firm will go up, and they will simply transfer the cost to the customer. That's it. There is very simple logic which is present there from the day first of the monetary economics. But what is happening? People are finding evidences in favor of the positive relationship, but these evidences are sometimes referred as paradox, sometimes they are referred as puzzles, and so and so. Whereas actually this is very simple. Look, there is an example. Brazil was having 14% markup rate in 2017. And Brazil in the past has experienced the hyperinflation. So they should be very cautious about hyperinflation. But they reduced, and today the policy rate in Brazil is less than 2%. But what you can see from the paragraph from this slide, that by reducing the policy rate, inflation also go down. So this is the current scenario. This is the thing which is evident from the data, and the most recent evidences from all around the world are supporting this view. This is the data from United States, and as you can see, before 2020 they started decreasing their policy rate, and inflation is also going down. Still, we and our state bank, we are thinking that by increasing interest rate we can reduce inflation. But what the empirical evidences from all over the world are telling? Look, this is another slide, and this is from UK, and they reduced the policy rate drastically. It was 0.7 in the beginning of 2020, and they reduced it to 0.1. What does this mean? If they borrow 1 trillion rupee, 1 trillion pound, they would have to pay just 1. But if we borrow, we have to pay 70. But actually, we are not paying 70, we are paying 110, because at present the coupon rate offered on the long-term borrowing is 11%. So can my respected colleague tell me what is the benefit of doing this? The only target was to reduce inflation, but actually the inflation in 2018 was lower than the present inflation. Okay, this is the situation of New Zealand. New Zealand is the country who is pioneer of this inflation targeting framework, which says that if you want to reduce inflation, you have to increase the interest rate. But what actually happened in the New Zealand, in February 2020, the New Zealand drastically cut the policy rate down. It was about 1%, and they reduced it to 0.2%. Okay, if the logic behind the inflation targeting was now look, before this move, the inflation was having upward trend. Okay, So if there is upward trend in inflation, what should New Zealand do in if the Central Bank of New Zealand was following the inflation targeting? They should increase the policy rate to cut it down. But what they did, they reduced it. This means that they are not, they theoretically and constitutionally they are the inflation targeting country, but practically they have abandoned the inflation targeting and they are going to quantitative easing, and they are quite justified in doing this because this time the inflation reduced by the reduction in policy rate. Okay, if you look at the paragraph in the bottom panel, you can see a dotted line. This is central bank borrowing of the government of New Zealand. You can see stock increase after 2020. This is because of COVID financing. They have to provide subsidies to people to consume and to maintain their spending pattern, and for this they have to borrow from the central bank. But what we are doing at present, uh, in 2018, when the PTI government took charge, at that time the state bank borrowing was 5.3 trillions, and today it is zero. What the government is, what the world is doing, the world is pumping money into the system so that the people can spend. And what we are doing, we are just taking the money from the banks and putting it into the pockets of central bank so that the people don't have any space to spend.
Excuse me, Dr. Atikur Rahman. I think we are not seeing that slide you are referring to. So if you can, because we are on the fourth slide still. If you could move the slide further. Yeah, this one. Now we can see it.
I was discussing this slide. Is it visible to
Okay.
you?
Yeah, it's visible now.
This
Okay.
this is telling you two things. In February 2020, the New Zealand decreased policy rate, and before this move, the inflation was having upward trend. So, in order to, if they were following the inflation targeting as stated in their constitution and as they are declaring themselves as inflation pioneer of inflation targeting, in fact, they should increase the interest rate to cut the policy rate to cut the inflation down. But what they did, they reduced the policy rate. This is because they understand the inflation targeting is no more a preferred mode to cut the inflation down. They have learned from the history. But what happened actually, inflation also go down, right? And if you look at the bottom panel, you can see a fast increase in, this is the dotted line is, hello, are you with me, please?
Gigi, yeah, we can listen to you. Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear
Okay.
you.
The
Well, if you
dotted
can kindly
line
maximize the slide.
is, if I maximize this, you cannot, slides are not moving, in fact. They're just
Yeah.
stuck at the first slide. That's why I'm, okay. Now
Achha,
look, there was stark increase in the central bank borrowing. You can see very fast slope of the line. But this is what they borrowed from their central bank in order to facilitate their public to spend. But what we are doing at present, as I have told you, in 2018, the borrowing of government from the central bank was 5.3 trillions, and today it is zero. What the central bank did with the help of government, they borrowed from the commercial banks and they paid to the central bank. Now, what will happen if you borrow such extensively from the commercial banks? Would there be any money for the business and for the public to spend? Okay. Look, this is the budget allocation. the largest head is in this budget allocation is markup on domestic debt, and we are allocating 2,631 billion rupees for the markup payment on domestic debt. Whereas if you look at the defense expenditure, these are only 1,289. Right? This means the allocation for the inflation control is more than double of that of the allocation for defense. The inflation control is more than double important than the defense expenditures. This is what we are doing. My respected colleague was showing us that they have cut the policy rate down by very huge percentage, but actually he did not show that what was the policy rate before and what is the current level. Look, at present, today, in the United Kingdom, the policy rate is just 0.1%, and if they are borrowing 1 trillion pound from the market, they have to pay only 1 billion on it. And if you are in United States and you are borrowing, you have to pay only 2.5 billion on 1 trillion rupees, and so on. But if we have to borrow, we have to pay 70 billion if we are looking just at policy rate. But as I have told you that actually the long-term borrowing is much more expensive made by the Central Bank of Pakistan. They are offering 11% as the coupon rate on it. Okay, look, at the time of this COVID, the UK announced to finance 80% of the income of the self-employed and furloughed workers, the people who are fired by their employers. And the United Kingdom is running a continuous deficit since 2001. In none of the years they have a surplus. And you know, at the time of COVID, the revenue must have gone down because of the reduction in the production and closure of many businesses. Despite this, the UK is also an inflation targeting country by constitution, but what they did, they reduced the policy rate from 0.7% to 0.1%, and at the same time, they announced to finance 80% income of the self-employed people and the furloughed workers. How can they manage such a huge amount? It's only by the borrowing from the Central Bank of England. They borrow from it. But what we are doing, what we are planning to do, we are going to impose a ban on the borrowing from the central bank. And what we are proposing, government cannot directly borrow. The government must borrow from the secondary market, from the commercial banks. Now, the state bank will finance the commercial banks, and the commercial bank will finance the government. Right? On the one hand, the commercial bank will have such a huge customer and they will have no need to finance any other customer in the market. And on the other hand, the people will have to pay additional margin to the commercial banks. Okay. I have discussed this, and this is the relationship between interest rate and inflation in United States. As I have told you, what we are doing, we are trying to cut the inflation down by increasing interest rate, but in every period of history, not only presently, in every period of history, there is positive relationship between interest rate and inflation. This is the United States data, federal fund rate and inflation. And this is separated into various decades. The first panel is showing 1950 up to 60, second panel is 60 up to 70, and then 70 up to 80, and so on. In every period, you will see they are not moving, the interest rate and inflation are not moving in the opposite direction. They are moving in the same direction. If the interest rate is going up, the inflation is also going up. And if it is going down, the inflation is also going down. And as I have explained, Thomas Tukey explained this phenomena 2 centuries ago. He gave very simple logic that the interest rate is a part of the cost of doing business, cost of production. So if it is going down, the cost of production will go down and ultimately consumer will benefit. And if it is reverse, the opposite. But still we are stuck with the inflation targeting despite seeing the failure of inflation targeting in the entire world. So the simple thing is, this is very huge project. Actually, we have allocated 2631 billion for the markup payment, and markup payment is nothing but a price we are paying to control the inflation, right? It's huge project. It is double as expensive, more than double of the budget allocated for the defense, and it is 6 multiples of the budget allocated for the civil government, right? If you are holding the federal government accountable for 475 billion rupees, which are on the behalf of government, why the SBP is not accountable for the 2631 billion rupees which are on the behalf of State Bank of Pakistan? So my respected colleague is there. I respect all the person from Central Bank of Pakistan, but just to point out, sir, please, if you have any evaluation of the monetary policy effectiveness, if you have anything which shows that by increasing the interest rate, the inflation went down, you can just bring it forward for me and for the people who are listening this, and I will just say sorry because it's my limited knowledge, right? But
Yeah.
Actually, if you don't have any evaluation, why you are spending such a huge money on a project which is not producing any result? Now, the second thing which I want to discuss, I will not move with the
Oh,
slides. I will take 2 to 3 minutes more. Are you listening me, please?
yeah. Yes, Dr. Sir.
Okay.
You please, you can take only 2 minutes. I think
Okay.
Riaz Saab has shown his hand. He has raised his hand. I think he wants to ask you something probably.
Okay.
Are you there,
I
Riaz
will
Saab?
I will
Yeah, he's there.
terminate my
But
discussion in
we
2 to
can,
3
we
minutes,
can.
and then
Okay then. Okay. Later.
I want to point out one more thing. One of the problems that present government is facing is unemployment. I will not go into the theoretical discussion. I will just show some empirical points. Look, we have many employment schemes in the past, like Yellow Cab scheme and like Kamyab Nojwan program. What is main feature of these programs? There is only one main feature of all these programs. That is the subsidized markup rates. This means if you subsidize the markup rates, you can generate employment, right? But what is happening? We are having the coupon rate equal to 11%, and then we are providing the subsidized markup rate at 5%, and the 6% is a margin which the government have to subsidize, and it will become a problem for the government treasury, right? Why not set the policy rate at 2% so that the bank, after having their margins, can provide the loans at 4 to 5%, which is happening in the entire world. The world is providing loan at 2% and 3%. If we are providing at 5 and 6%, what is the problem with this? So I have shown you the entire fiscal distress that is there is because of the allocation of 2600 billion rupees, which is 42% of the entire budget, for the markup payment, which is a consequence of the choice of policy rate by the State Bank of Pakistan. And if you throw this money into the, if you don't extract this money from the treasury, they will have enough money for all their projects. They will have money for Diamit Bhasha Dam, and they will have money for COVID relief, and they will have money for all the projects that they have. So instead of accountability, instead of the autonomy at this time, what is needed for the Central Bank of Pakistan is a greater accountability. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Atiqur Rahman, for your very illuminating, very thought-provoking and insightful presentation. So we'll take the questions from those who have raised their hands later on after the last presentation.